G'day. Thank you for sticking with me. This is number 7, and I now start his life from birth. From the 5th of September 1989. Was this where the nightmare began? No, because although there were problems with his health, Ashley was a terrific kid, a delightful child, and really the joy he gave both Kerry and I far outweighed any special needs. And for those first 2 years living in Coburg, Melbourne, the only concerns were financial. But I had landed a steady and demanding job in a reputable company, so life was getting better, and Kerry was more than capable to take on the care of Ashley and still have time for our oldest son Damien. 2 days after Ashley's birth, the phone rang, jolted me out of my slumber in the chair. It was my wife Kerry calling me at home from the hospital. Our little boy is not well. They have to do more tests, she said softly and slowly in tears. I thought to myself, why the hell did the doctor tell my poor wife at 9 p.m. that they have to do more tests rather than wait until the next morning to tell either her or myself? Because Ashley was floppy at birth, the doctor thought he may have a mental disability, thus the reason for extensive neurological tests. He spent the first few days of his life in a humidity-crib. Extensive tests proved that Ashley's problems were purely physical. His diagnosis at the time was that he had a congenital myopathy, which basically meant his muscle tone was low. Ashley never crawled, and instead got around by rolling. His was a quick birth, and despite being held back at work by work commitments, I was able to witness his entry into the world. Later I attended a father's support group in Brunswick, Melbourne. Many of the fathers had non-responsive children and seemed worse off than me. One father in particular had a daughter who had become a virtual vegetable after having had a dose of meningococcal. He spoke of people who would say, "You're coping well," in which he responded, "There are days I don't want to cope. I just want to lie in bed and not get up at all." I was touched by this statement and never forget it. I'm sure that Ashley felt like this sometimes. Looking after Ash was no different than caring for a healthy child. He was a good sleeper and an undemanding baby. My work at the time in accounting was demanding but steady. Despite having high mortgage rates, we were coping financially, and while I worked, Kerry stayed at home caring for Ash and Damien. About 18 months after Ashley's birth, we were told by a visiting physiotherapist that he might be eligible for a disability allowance for Ash. We were frustrated that we weren't told about it sooner by Ashley's doctors. The disability allowance should have been paid from birth, but we were only back paid for 12 months. It was a lesson in dealing with government bureaucrats. Don't expect them to tell you anything that may be in your favour. During the time before moving to Tasmania, Kerry and I would take Ashley, along with his brother Damien, to day trips to Fawkner, Kerry's parents, and to Beaumaris, where my mother lived. He had one trip down to a resort on the Mornington Peninsula during this time. On this trip, and many others, the trips to Fawkner and Beaumaris, we travelled in our motorcycle and sidecar, Ashley sitting next to his brother.